Something is deeply wrong with our understanding of reality. Not a small mistake, not a missing detail, something fundamental. A growing number of scientists are starting to admit it, quietly at first. Now, more openly, the human brain may not be enough to explain consciousness. That statement sounds simple. It is not, because if the brain does not fully explain consciousness, then one of two things must be true. Either science is incomplete in a major way, or consciousness is far stranger than anyone expected. Even leading physicists like Greene have raised this possibility, the idea that reality itself might be missing a piece, not a small piece, a central one, and this changes the question completely. For decades, science has asked, what is consciousness? But now a more disturbing question is taking its place. Where does it come from? This video will take you into that question. You will see why the brain, despite everything we know about it, still fails to explain the most important thing about being human. You will discover the problem that has confused neuroscientists, philosophers, and physicists for decades. A problem so difficult that it forced some of the smartest minds on Earth to rethink reality itself. You will also explore theories that sound almost impossible. Ideas that suggest consciousness might not be created inside your head at all. Ideas that hint it could be part of the universe in a way we do not yet understand. And by the end, you will see why this mystery is not just about the mind. It could change how we see existence itself. Here is what makes this even more unsettling. Science has already mapped the brain in extreme detail. There are about 86 billion neurons inside it, each one connected to thousands of others. Signals move through this network at incredible speeds, electrical pulses, chemical exchanges, patterns that shift every second. Scientists can track these signals, they can measure them, they can even predict certain behaviors based on brain activity. If a part of the brain is damaged, specific abilities disappear. Language, memory, emotion, movement. This creates a powerful conclusion. The brain produces the mind, it sounds logical, it feels correct, but then a problem appears. A very quiet problem at first, easy to ignore, then impossible to explain, because none of this explains experience. You can describe every neuron firing when someone sees the color red. You can map every signal, every pathway, every reaction, but that does not explain why red feels like something. Why it is not just data, why it is not just processing, why there is an inner experience at all. This is the gap that refuses to close. You can build a machine that processes information. You can make it recognize patterns. You can train it to respond like a human, but there is no evidence that it feels anything. And that is the difference. Processing is not experience. Reaction is not awareness. And this is where science reaches a boundary it cannot cross. Even with perfect knowledge of the brain, something is still missing. This problem has a name. It is called the hard problem of consciousness. The name sounds simple. The reality is not. It is called hard because it may not be solvable using normal scientific methods. Easy problems explain functions, how the brain stores memories, how it reacts to danger, how it processes sound and vision. These can be tested, measured, repeated, but the hard problem asks something deeper. Why is there an experience at all? Why is there something it feels like to be alive? And here is a lesser known fact. Some scientists believe that even if we mapped every single neuron in the brain down to the smallest detail, the hard problem would still remain unsolved. Because the problem is not about complexity, it is about explanation. You can explain how something works. That does not mean you explain why it feels like something. This is a point where many scientists become uncomfortable because it suggests that consciousness might not be fully physical, or at least not fully explained by physical processes. And that idea begins to open doors that science has tried to keep closed. Some researchers now question whether consciousness is produced by the brain at all. So others suggest that consciousness might be a basic part of reality itself, something that does not emerge from matter but exists alongside it. Even more surprising, certain interpretations of physics hint that the observer may play a role in shaping reality. That is not science fiction. That is a serious discussion in modern physics. And yet, most people never hear about this because it challenges a deeply held belief that everything about the mind can be reduced to the brain. That belief has guided decades of research. It has produced incredible discoveries. but has not solved the one problem that matters most, why you are aware right now, not thinking, not reacting, not processing, aware, and this is where the mystery becomes impossible to ignore, because consciousness is the one thing you cannot step outside of. You can doubt the world, you can question reality, you can even question your own thoughts, but you cannot deny that you're experiencing something. That fact is immediate, direct, undeniable, and yet science still cannot explain it. That is why this topic is becoming one of the most important questions in modern science, not just in neuroscience, but in physics, philosophy, and even mathematics. Because if consciousness does not come from the brain in the way we think, then something about reality is incomplete. Something essential is missing from the current model of the universe. And that realization is starting to spread slowly, quietly, but steadily. In this video, you will go deeper into that mystery. You will see why the hard problem of consciousness has forced scientists to rethink everything they thought they knew. You will explore the theories that attempt to explain it, from brain-based models to radical ideas that place consciousness at the foundation of reality. And you will understand why the deeper we look into the mind, the more the universe itself begins to look strange. If you want to explore the edge of science, if you want to understand one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time, then stay with this video. Welcome to the channel. Subscribe now, because this is where science stops being simple and starts becoming truly unsettling. The brain is often described as the most complex object in the known universe. It processes information at a scale that is almost impossible to grasp. Billions of neurons fire in patterns that change every second. Electrical signals move, chemicals flow, networks activate and shut down in precise timing. From the outside, it looks complete. It looks like a system that explains everything about the mind, and yet something does not fit. Science can explain how the brain processes information. It can show how light enters the eye, how signals travel to the visual cortex, how patterns are recognized and stored. Every step can be mapped with increasing precision. But none of that explains why there is an experience. Take something simple, the color red. Scientists can track exactly what happens when you see it. Specific neurons fire, certain regions of the brain activate, data flows through a network that identifies the color. But there is a second part to this process, a part that science cannot reach, the feeling of red, not the data, not the signal, the experience itself. Why does it feel like something to see red? Why is there an inner sensation instead of just silent processing? This is where the problem begins. Because no matter how deeply you study the brain, you only find more processes, more activity, more mechanisms. You never find the experience itself. There is no place in the brain where the feeling of red exists as an object. No single neuron holds it. No clear structure produces it. This creates a gap between what the brain does and what the mind feels. And this gap has a name that many people outside science never hear. It is called the explanatory gap. It separates physical processes from subjective experience. On one side, there are neurons, signals, and measurable activity. On the other side, there is awareness, sensation, the feeling of being alive. Science can describe the first side in great detail. It cannot cross to the second. Even more unsettling, some researchers believe that no amount of data will ever close this gap. Even if scientists mapped every neuron in the brain, even if they tracked every signal in real time, even if they built a perfect model of the entire system, the question would still remain. Why does any of it feel like something? This is not a small missing piece. It is a fundamental problem, because it suggests that understanding the brain may not be the same as understanding the mind. There are already hints that something deeper is going on. In certain experiments, brain activity related to decisions appears before a person becomes aware of making that decision. The brain acts first, awareness follows later. This raises a disturbing possibility. Conscious experience might not be the cause of actions. It might be something that appears after the fact. At the same time, there are cases where people lose large portions of brain function, yet still report clear and vivid experiences. The brain changes, the awareness remains. These details are often overlooked, but they point to the same problem. The brain explains behavior. It does not fully explain experience. And this is the point where neuroscience reaches its limit. not because it has failed, but because the question itself may require a different kind of answer, something beyond signals and structures, something that changes how we think about reality itself. In the 1990s, a single idea changed the entire conversation about the mind. It did not come from a lab. It did not come from a new machine or a new scan. It came from a philosopher named David Chalmers. He looked at everything science had achieved and saw a hidden problem that many had ignored. He gave it a name that would spread across neuroscience, physics, and philosophy. The hard problem of consciousness. At first, it sounded like just another academic term, but it was not. It drew a sharp line between two very different kinds of questions. On one side, there were the easy problems. These are the problems science is very good at solving. How does the brain store memories? How does it recognize faces? How does it react to danger? How does it process language? Each of these can be studied, measured, tested, and over time they can be explained. The brain becomes a system of inputs and outputs, signals and responses, cause and effect. These are called easy, not because they are simple, but because they are solvable with standard scientific tools. But then there's the other side, the hard problem, not how the brain works, but why any of it is accompanied by experience, why all of this processing is not happening in complete darkness. Why there is something it feels like to be inside a mind. This question changes everything because it cannot be answered by adding more data. You can explain every function of the brain and still not explain why there is awareness. And this is where Chalmers forced scientists to pause. He argued that even a perfect understanding of the brain would leave the hard problem untouched. That claim was unsettling. It suggested that consciousness might not be explained by neuroscience alone. It might not even be explained by biology at all. And slowly, this idea began to spread. Some scientists resisted it. Others began to take it seriously because the more the brain was studied, the clearer the gap became. There was no obvious bridge between physical activity and subjective experience, no clear path from neurons firing to the feeling of being alive. And this opened the door to more radical thinking. If consciousness cannot be explained by the brain, then where does it come from? Some researchers began to explore the idea that consciousness might not be produced at all, that it might be something more fundamental. A basic feature of reality, like space or time, this idea sounds extreme, but it solves a problem that neuroscience has not been able to solve. Because if consciousness is fundamental, then it does not need to be created. It already exists. Others propose that the brain might not generate consciousness, but instead interact with it in some unknown way. This shifts the role of the brain completely, from creator to participant. And once that shift happens, the implications become much larger. The question is no longer limited to biology. It expands into physics, into the nature of reality itself. Because if consciousness is not just a product of matter, then matter might not be the full story. And that's where the discussion begins to move beyond the brain, into ideas that challenge the structure of the universe itself. As the limits of the brain-based explanation became clearer, some scientists and philosophers began to look in a very different direction. Not deeper into the brain, but deeper into reality itself. The idea sounds strange at first, but it is being discussed more seriously than most people realize. Consciousness might not be something that appears at the end of complex processes. It might be there from the beginning. A basic property of the universe, just like space, just like time. This idea is known as panpsychism. It suggests that consciousness is not limited to humans or even to animals. Instead, it exists in a very simple form throughout nature, not as thoughts, not as emotions, but as tiny fragments of awareness. Even the smallest systems could carry a faint trace of experience. This does not mean that a rock thinks or feels in any human sense. It means that the building blocks of reality might include something that, when combined in the right way, becomes full consciousness. This idea was once dismissed as philosophical speculation. Now it is slowly returning to serious discussion because it offers a way to close the gap. If consciousness is already part of the fabric of reality, then it does not need to suddenly appear from non-conscious matter. It was there all along. And as systems become more complex, that basic awareness becomes richer and more unified. There is a surprising detail that many people do not know. Some early pioneers of modern physics were open to ideas like this. They saw that the observer plays a strange role in experiments at the quantum level. In certain cases, the act of measurement seems to affect the outcome. Particles behave differently when they're observed. This has led to decades of debate, not about wet, her, the effect is real, but about what it means. Some interpretations avoid any link to consciousness. Others suggest that the observer cannot be fully removed from the system. And this is where things become even more unusual. Because if observation is tied to physical outcomes, then the line between mind and matter starts to blur. A few scientists have taken this idea further. Among them is Roger Penrose. He proposed that consciousness might be connected to quantum processes inside the brain. Not at the level of neurons firing, but at a much deeper level, inside tiny structures within brain cells where quantum effects could play a role. This theory suggests that consciousness might arise from processes that are not fully captured by classical physics, processes that are sensitive, complex, and still not fully understood. It also implies that consciousness is linked to the fundamental laws of the universe, not just biology. This is a very different picture from the standard view. In the standard view, the brain creates consciousness through complex computation. In this alternative view, the brain taps into deeper processes that are woven into reality itself. There's no clear answer yet, but the direction of the question has changed. It is no longer only about neurons and signals. It is about the structure of the universe and whether consciousness is something that emerges from it or something that has been there from the very beginning. Because if even a small part of this idea is true, then the brain may not be the source of consciousness at all. It may be something else entirely. There is another idea that pushes the mystery even further. It does not try to fix the brain-based model. It replaces it. According to this view, the brain does not create consciousness at all. It receives it. At first, this sounds extreme, but the logic behind it is simple. A radio does not create music. It receives signals that already exist in the air. The device translates those signals into sound. If the radio is damaged, the sound becomes distorted. If it is completely broken, the sound disappears, but the signal itself is still there. Some scientists and thinkers believe the brain may work in a similar way, not as a generator of consciousness, but as a filter. A system that takes in something more fundamental and turns it into the experience of a single focused mind. This idea can explain something that standard neuroscience struggles with, the unity of consciousness. Inside the brain, there is no central point where everything comes together. Different regions process different types of information. Vision is handled in one area, sound in another, touch in another. Even within vision, color, shape, and motion are processed separately. All of this happens at the same time in different places. Yet the experience feels unified. You do not see separate pieces. You experience one seamless reality. There's no delay, no visible stitching. This is known as the binding problem, and it remains unsolved. How does a system with so many separate processes create a single continuous experience? The receiver model offers a different answer. It suggests that the unity is not created by the brain. It already exists. The brain simply limits and organizes it. There are lesser-known observations that seem to support this direction. In certain altered states, such as deep meditation or under specific substances, people report a breakdown of the normal sense of self. The boundaries between thoughts, senses, and identity begin to dissolve. Instead of a focus point of awareness, there is a wider field of experience. Some describe it as more intense, more connected, less filtered. From a strict brain-based view, this is just abnormal activity. But from the receiver perspective, it could mean something else. It could mean that the brain is reducing its filtering function, allowing more of the underlying experience to pass through. There are also rare medical cases where individuals function with significantly reduced brain volume, yet maintain normal or near normal awareness. These cases are not common, but they are difficult to explain. If consciousness depends directly on brain structure, such outcomes should not be possible, and yet they exist. This does not prove the receiver theory, but it adds pressure to the standard model because it shows that the relationship between brain and consciousness may not be as direct as once believed. The implications of this idea are difficult to ignore. If the brain is a receiver, then consciousness is not confined to it. It is not locked inside the skull. It exists in a broader sense. The body becomes an interface, not a container, and this raises deeper questions about where consciousness actually is, about whether it can exist independently of the brain, and about how far it might extend beyond what we currently understand, because once the brain is no longer the source, the boundaries begin to disappear, and the mystery begins to grow. The deeper scientists look, the stranger the evidence becomes. Some of the most unsettling findings come from controlled experiments, not theories. not speculation, real measurements. In the 1980s, a series of experiments changed how researchers think about decision-making. They were led by a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet. Participants were asked to perform a simple action: move a finger whenever they felt the urge. At the same time their brain activity was being recorded, there was also a clock. Participants had to report the exact moment they became aware of the decision to move. The result was unexpected. A signal in the brain appeared before the person reported making the decision. Not a tiny difference, sometimes hundreds of milliseconds earlier, the brain acted first. Awareness came later. This suggests something difficult to accept. The feeling of making a choice may not be the cause of the action. It may be a delayed experience of something that has already started. Later, studies repeated similar experiments with more advanced technology. Some pushed the timing even further back. In certain cases, patterns in brain activity could predict a decision seconds before a person became aware of it. Seconds. In terms of brain processing, that is a long time. This raises a serious question. If the brain decides before awareness appears, then what role does consciousness actually play? At the same time, another set of experiments revealed something equally strange: split brain research. In rare medical procedures, the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain is cut to treat severe epilepsy. This separates the left and right sides of the brain. After the operation, patients appear mostly normal in daily life. They can speak, move, and function, but under controlled conditions, something unusual happens. Each half of the brain begins to act independently. One hand may perform an action that the other hand tries to stop. Information shown to one side of the brain cannot always be reported by the other. In some cases, it appears as if there are two centers of awareness in one body, two streams of experience, and yet the person still feels like a single individual. This creates a contradiction. If consciousness is unified, how can it split? If it can split, then what holds it together in the first place? Then there are reports from extreme conditions. Near-death experiences. People who come close to death sometimes describe vivid awareness, clear thoughts, intense perception, a strong sense of presence. Some report observing events while their brain activity is severely reduced. In a few cases, there are claims of accurate details being recalled from periods when normal brain function should not support such experiences. These accounts are debated. They are difficult to test under controlled conditions, but they continue to appear across cultures and medical settings, and they share patterns that are hard to ignore. Taken together, these findings point in the same direction. The relationship between brain activity and conscious experience is not simple. It is not a direct one-to-one connection. There are delays, divisions, unexpected moments where awareness does not match the physical process. Each experiment adds another layer to the mystery. Instead of reducing consciousness to brain activity, the data begins to stretch the connection. And with every new result, the question becomes harder to avoid: whether consciousness is truly produced by the brain or whether something else is involved beneath the surface. If consciousness is not fully explained by the brain, then the problem does not stay inside biology. It spreads outward into physics, into the structure of reality itself, because the brain is made of matter. If matter cannot explain consciousness, then matter might not be the full story. This is where the question becomes much larger, not just about the mind, but about the universe. Some scientists are beginning to explore a possibility that once sounded impossible: that consciousness may play a role in shaping reality, not in a mystical sense, but in a physical one. This idea is linked to one of the strangest areas of science: quantum mechanics. At the smallest scales, particles do not behave like solid objects. They exist in probabilities, multiple possible states at once. Only when a measurement is made does one outcome appear.
This is known as the collapse of the wave function. The exact mechanism behind this collapse is still debated, and one question has never fully gone away. What counts as a measurement? In many experiments, the presence of an observer seems to matter.
Not necessarily a human observer, but an interaction that defines a result. Still, some interpretations suggest that observation itself cannot be completely separated from the outcome. This creates a strange situation. The observer is not just watching reality. The observer may be part of the process that brings a specific reality into focus. This idea is uncomfortable for many scientists because it challenges a core assumption that the universe exists in a fixed state independent of observation. Instead, it suggests that reality may not be fully defined until it is observed, and if observation is tied to consciousness, even indirectly, then consciousness becomes part of the structure of the universe, not an accidental byproduct, but a participant. There are lesser-known discussions among physicists that go even further. Some propose that information, not matter, is the most fundamental layer of reality. Others suggest that space and time themselves may emerge from deeper processes. In these models, consciousness begins to appear less like an anomaly and more like a natural feature, something that fits into the system rather than something that must be forced into it. At the same time, this raises difficult questions. Where does the observer end and the universe begin? If observation affects outcomes, then the line between subject and object becomes unclear. The separation between mind and world starts to blur. This does not mean that thoughts directly control reality in a simple way. It means that the act of observation may be more deeply connected to physical processes than previously understood. And this connection is still not fully explained. The more scientists explore this space, the more they encounter limits, not just in technology, but in understanding, because the tools used to study reality are themselves part of the system being studied. The observer cannot step completely outside the experiment, and that creates a loop, a system trying to understand itself from within. This is where the mystery becomes unavoidable. If consciousness is built into the fabric of existence, then understanding it is not just another scientific problem. It is a key to understanding reality as a whole, and that realization is starting to change the direction of modern science, quietly, slowly, but in a way that could reshape everything that comes next. Science has explained things that once felt impossible to understand. From distant galaxies to the smallest particles, the universe has slowly revealed its structure. Equations describe motion, laws explain energy, models predict events across space and time. It feels complete, but one mystery still stands untouched at the center of it all: consciousness. The one thing every human experiences directly remains unexplained. The deeper scientists look, the stranger it becomes. The brain can be mapped, measured, and analyzed in extreme detail, yet the feeling of being aware still slips through every explanation. The gap remains, and that gap is not small. It points to something missing, maybe a missing piece in neuroscience, maybe a deeper layer of physics, or something even more fundamental that has not yet been discovered. Some of the brightest minds in science are starting to accept this, not as failure, but as a sign that the journey is far from over. Because if consciousness is not just a product of the brain, then it may be part of reality itself. And if that is true, then understanding it could change everything. How we see the universe, how we define life, how we understand our own existence. The answers may not come soon, but the questions are already reshaping science. And that makes this one of the most important mysteries of our time. If this made you think even a little differently, stay with this channel, like the video, so more people can explore these ideas, and subscribe for more deep dives into the questions that science is still trying to answer, because the deeper we go, the more reality begins to feel unfamiliar, and the next discovery might change everything again.